Afternoon, Chapter 9, Lecture A. We're going to get into the market revolution. If you've pulled up from the website, Chapter 9 PowerPoint, understand there's a couple things with this chapter. There are two chapters this week we will cover because of timing, Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. I will not hit every single aspect of both chapters, but I will hit some key elements as we go forward this week. So understand this lecture will be Chapter 9 and 10, dealing with the market revolution, and then I believe democracy in America is the title of Chapter 10. So we're going to cover two chapters this week in this lecture series. As always, not everything will be in the notes. Focus questions for this Chapter 9 portion. What were the main elements of the market revolution? How did the market revolution spark social change? How did the meanings of American freedom change in this period? And how did the market revolution affect the lives of workers, women, and African Americans? If you didn't notice on the first slide I put, one does not simply go to the top of Google. It's a funny little meme, and it's one from the Lord of the Rings if you've watched memes. But that is a question. How do you get to the top of the Google search engine? And so as we talk about market and the changing revolution of how economies function, one of the biggest things today is like if you get at the top of Google search, that's a huge thing, right? And it comes down to, well, the simple put, money. So, introduction. Marquez de Lafayette visited the United States nearly 50 years after the American Revolution American War of Independence, we should say. He had been there as a young French officer and fought in the American War of Independence. He went back to France, and he obviously saw what happened in the French Revolution. It wouldn't have helped if he knew that the freedom of America would be founded on wouldn't have helped if he knew that the freedom of America would be founded on slavery and expansion. So he couldn't realize at the initial onslaught, and then later, his perspective about America's expansion might have been different if he knew all the details about it from looking back. Alex de Tocqueville, French historian, stated they have an immensely high opinion of themselves and are not far from believing that they are from a species apart from the rest of the human race. He's very critical of Americans after this period, saying like Americans think very much of themselves. Even to this day, do Americans think very highly of themselves? The answer is yes. We're very cocky at times. But looking at these French, Lafayette, he knew the potential that the United States could be, and he even witnessed it, but he could never have guessed the role that slavery would have played. And then Tocqueville, writing later, basically called the Americans out for their attitude. Now, three historical processes unleashed by the Revolution accelerated after the War of 1812. So after the War of 1812, you're going to have three major things start to happen in the United States. The spread of market relations. You're going to have the growth of business and markets. You're going to have the Western movement of the population. And you're going to have the rise of a vigorous political democracy, which is going to be the next chapter. But the big three things that are going to happen in this period is you're going to have a creation of new markets, expansion west, and then changes in the way we do politics, essentially. Thus, the first two, Western population and the market, we're going to talk about in this chapter. So new economy 1. Market revolution swept over the United States in the first half of the 19th century. You're going to have roads and steamboats. Not roads like we think of today, but roads that will allow quicker travel across the country. In rapid succession, steamboats, canals, railroads, and telegraph connected the West for settlement. Very rapidly, the United States will invest in canal building. One of the most impressive will be the Erie Canal. And then you're going to have the telegraph and the railroads that are going to come in the 20s, 30s, and 40s that are going to open the West. And not to mention they're going to have the ability to communicate from the East Coast all the way to the central part of the United States and eventually all the way to east to west. 1806, Congress authorized the construction of the paved national road from Cumberland, Maryland to the Old Northwest. The first official road built and constructed by the government. And you're going to see the roads offshoot from there. Then you're going to have Robert Fulton is going to perfect the steamboat called the Clermont and show the commerce power of the steamboat and its usage on riverways going up and down without the cumbersome usage of mules and other creatures to go upstream. The Erie Canal, completed in 1825, was 365 miles, and it connected Erie Canal to the Great Lakes with New York City. You're going to open the central part of the upper Ohio River Valley area to trade, and this is going to and bring all those things in and out. It's going to be revolutionary on that, not to mention the speed of travel. Set up a series of other states to do the same thing. However, in 1837, the Depression will hit the United States. Most went bankrupt later or were not completed. So though the Erie Canal was a great success, in part to the domestic policies and economic policies of Andrew Jackson, there'll be a depression that hits in 1837. That will undoubtedly undercut some of these travel things. Here, if you look at the map on the next slide, you will see the Erie Canal, a pretty large canal, and connecting a great deal of New York and New York City. In short, it made it easy for people in places such as Buffalo, Rochester, and Albany, and even Syracuse, to be able to effectively communicate travel to the hub of places, New York City. The economy too. Railroads and telegraph. Now, canals connected existing waterways that already existed, rivers, and then they also will connect over land and create new jobs and abilities for people to flourish along these canals for stops. Railroads opened the vast new areas in the interior, so where there was no natural riverways, railroads will be laid to connect over land routes, and also they could travel faster and also could connect already established cities that may not exist on an existing river. In 1828, Baltimore, Ohio, the nation's first railroad company began, or commercial railroad began, but by 1860 the railroad network had grown to over 30,000 miles, more than the total in the rest of the world combined. One thing the United States will lead in the 1800s is the expansion of the railroad. And that's mostly due to the size of the United States, not to mention our lust and desire to go west. The train represented that expansion west. Now, as the train takes off, so does the telegraph. Samuel B. Morse invented the telegraph in the 1830s, released for commercial use in 1844, made transfer of news much faster along the nation. And what you're going to see, as the railroads push west, and as the railroads lay infrastructure for the trains to travel, the telegraph, basically think power lines or telegraph lines, are going to go with the tracks. And what that does is mean you can send messages pretty instantaneous. That being said, it is very easy to snap telegraph lines, and so it's not a foolproof method, but it's now we have the ability to communicate much, much faster. The rise of the West. Between 1790 and 1840, some 4.5 million people crossed the Appalachian Mountains and went west. Usually went in groups, incorporated with each other to clear land, etc. Three groups were early Westerners. First, small farmers and planters created the new cotton kingdoms in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So we got the deep south of like Georgia, Florida, even parts of Alabama. But now you're going to see people push further west. And even you can even argue some of this is going to be Missouri, where small farmers are going to move. But you're going to have the new cotton kingdoms emerge in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas. So that more western deep south. The upper south went to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. You're going to see the Chicago, especially Cincinnati, places like that expand rapidly. Chicago is going to blow up. Then you're going to have New Englanders who are going to look for new opportunities economically. They're going to move into Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin. And many of these people will find their way even further west to Missouri. Now, Missouri was still the westernmost state that was really accessible. It was the edge of the frontier. The state, it wasn't a state quite yet, but people were moving there, but it was still considered the frontier. And we'll get to more of that stuff later. Many became squatters, setting up on unoccupied land without a legal title, and would acquire it either just by default or by actually purchasing it or just taking it from other people. And as we get into this, squatting will become a huge issue in Kansas as we get closer to the American Civil War. Americans kept going into Florida, and then finally in 1819 we will buy it from the Spanish. The Spanish were kind of done and over with it. They needed the money more than they needed Florida. And then Americans kept moving west even into foreign lands. As we learned a little bit about Lewis and Clark, we already had bought Louisiana before the Clark expedition officially set out, but it was already in St. Louis preparing to go before we actually acquired it. So we had no qualms about going west. We simply just wanted it, so we went. New Economy 3. An internal borderland. Because of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 prohibited slavery in the Old Northwest, the Ohio River came into mark a boundary between free and slave societies. So the Ohio River itself, which runs parallel, basically not completely parallel, but mostly parallel with almost like the Mason-Dixon line to some degree. Most of those in the southern parts of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio would ship their stuff south, and that's where you're going to have the cultural differences interface. Really, anything north of there, slavery was not used at all, and the population of African Americans would have been much, much lower. Really, in the north, the only place you're going to see slaves will be in the northeastern part, up in the New England area, and primarily for servitude type service or butlery or working docks and stuff, not in the fields. For one, agriculture was not a big mainstay there. Now, in the South, though, so this was more commercial farming, crops, businesses and stuff, more the South, cotton. Cotton is king. With the invention of the cotton gin, it's going to rapidly change the South. The rise of the Industrial Revolution also led to the rise of the South. Demand for cotton in the North and the textile industry spurred the creation of the cotton gin by Eli Whitney. Slavery was expanded or was expected to die out, but with the demand for, because of the traditional slave trade of tobacco farms, because of the exhausted soil and just it wasn't productive anymore, they thought it was going to go on. But older planters moved into the Deep South and was given land from defeated Indians, and they're going to focus on cotton. Small farmers were forced into the pioneering backcountry that was not as good country. The old planters are going to switch from tobacco to cotton. And then, though the Constitution outlawed external slavery importation in 1808, they'll organize internal slave trading, basically like a cattle farm system, focusing in 1808. In 1793, the U.S. has produced 5 million pounds of cotton. By 1820, that number had, exploded to 170 million pounds of cotton. So you can see the rapid change of the American economy in the South. You can see here the Ohio River Valley if you look at the map. Okay, market society 1. No change in the South, just kept reproducing the same models that moved west. The whole plantation system will go forward. Commercial farmers transferred the region north from the west into an integrated economy of commercial farms and manufacturing cities. Farmers were drawn into the system and were connected to the east through loans, credits, and consumers. Investments like the steel plow from John Deere and the reaper from Cyrus McCormick opened the door for more in the west and also better ability to plow and till the land. The growth of cities formed in the western frontier. Cincinnati was known as Porkopolis, slaughterhouses where the pigs will be taken to be slaughtered. Chicago became the greatest western city due to the railroad connecting the west to the east. And driving businessmen took craftsmen out of the home and put them in the factory where they worked faster and for less play, but produced more. So you're going to have the rise of industry to some degree, not what we would think of the latter half of the century, but certainly on the way. Market society 2, the factory system. Transformed the textile industry, mechanical tools. Samuel Slaughter memorized British machinery and their workings and brought it to the United States and built from memory the first factory in Pawtucket, Massachusetts in 1790. Others developed such as Waltham and even created the town of Lowell, Massachusetts for textiles. All these cities were located along the fall line. Waterfalls and river rapids are what produced their power. They put a big old mill on it, would churn it and help run the simple machines they were using. American system manufacturers relied on the mass production of interchangeable parts that could be rapidly assembled and standardized finished products. That's going to lead to what we have what's called the mill girls. Some employed whole families, but most wanted unmarried young women. They set up boarding homes with strict rules. First-time women left home to work in the workforce, and they were very easy, and they usually listened to the rules. Valued the opportunity to earn money, so the women had the chance to actually go earn money. So they're not necessarily going to balk at that, but they were not always the best conditions. Didn't last long, though. After a few years, went back home, married, or moved west. So they'd go make a little money, usually for the support of the family, and then they'd get married off and go on their way. The growth of immigration. Between 1840 and 1860, over 4 million people entered the United States. In 1860, New York had 814,000 residents. Nearly, probably, not quite a half, 384 were immigrants. Largest factories were in the failed revolution, or the largest factors were the failed revolution of 1848 and the Great Famine of 1845, the 1851 in Europe. You have Germany was not yet unified, and there was failed revolutions there, and also France. France went through a struggle again, no surprise. There was the potato famine or Blythe in Ireland from 1845 to 1851. The Irish will settle in the Northeast, and unskilled work wore canals, common farmhands, etc. Germans settled more in the German triangle of St. Louis, Cincinnati, and Milwaukee, including our area. They were looking for farming. But all stayed in their tight-knit groups and really didn't intermingle with the local population too much until later. You're going to have the rise of nativism. Americans, so as this all unfolds, as people are moving west, the country's transforming. Americans have a haven for those seeking refuge as coexist with the suspicion and hostility of newcomers. Though America was later labeled the melting pot, we were very fearful of outsiders, and even to this day we're still fearful. Archbishop John Hughes of New York City made the Catholic Church more assertive in America, scared many Protestant Americans that the Catholic Church, and under the leadership of the Pope, was going to try to assert its authority in this country. Lyman Beecher published a sermon called A Plea for the West, argued that Catholics were planning to dominate the American West. Nativists, or nativism, those who feared the impact of immigration on American politics and social life, are going to become more prominent. Now, they've never become a majority in our country. They are definitely fearful of outsiders. I'll do one more slide, the transformation of law. The rise of corporations and laws that allowed for them to be liable for the company's debts. You're going to see that people are going to create new companies at this point because of the laws. They could lose a lot of money and not be held accountable. So we talked a lot about the changing society, though we skipped over a lot of things. We're going to come back and hit some things. The economy from 1815 all the way up to 1860 is going to transform, be interconnected, and you're going to see a switch on how America operated. We'll talk more about it later. Have a good day.